This photograph was taken in 1961 and depicts 7 of the most recognizable drivers in all of history: Bruce McLaren, Stirling Moss, Toby Brooks, Graham Hill, Joe Benier, Wolfgang von Trips, and finally, a young Damon Hill. While Damon Hill would have to wait until the early 90s for his shot at Formula One, the 6 drivers seated around him raced during one of the most difficult and dangerous times to be a racing driver, the 50s to the early 70s. While the early 70s wasn't the end of dangerous racing, and while I would love to make a video like that of Drive to Survive or the movie Senna, I think to do this topic in a dramatic manner is almost impossible to do right, at least for its memory. Today we're going to look at the grim reality of early Formula One. This video is going to be very blunt and straightforward. I'm simply going to show how dangerous it was to be a driver by simply showing the numbers, pictures, and video that few people outside of Formula One know of. Finally, while the numbers that I show are specifically Formula One most of the time, I will also be talking about motor racing as a whole during this time. So to begin, let's look at only 3 seasons from the Formula One and IndyCar calendar of the 1950s. In 1957, Eugenio Castellotti and Keith Andrews would die before Fangio would be crowned champion. In 1958, Pat O'Connor, Luigi Musso, Peter Collins, and Stuart Lewis Evans would all be killed driving racing cars. And finally, in 1959, Jerry Unser and Bob Courtner would die at the Indy 500. 8 people who all had families and maybe even kids that would no longer see them. In 3 years of the sport's history, 8 of its players would be killed. Put that into perspective of, say, the Premier League in football. Currently, there are 558 players contesting this league, and if one of them were to die during this time, it would be a complete tragedy. To have 4 people get into a car and never get out would cause feelings that even today I struggle to imagine.
Variante Ascari, named after Italy's last Formula One world champion, Alberto Ascari.
That was the Ascari chicane, and as it was said earlier, it is named after Alberto Ascari, a Formula One driver from the 1950s. Ascari raced for Scuderia Ferrari and was its first and only Italian champion in 1952 and 1953. However, Ascari died testing a Formula One car at Monza at the very corner that we would later be named in his honor. Ascari, though, has one extra aspect of his story. His father, Antonio Ascari, would also die at the same age in 1952 at the French Grand Prix. It is often in motorsport the fathers and sons will both race in different eras of Formula One. Antonio and Alberto Ascari's tragic fates is one end of the scale. Nico Rosberg and his father, Keke Rosberg, are an example on the other end of the spectrum. Both are still living today, and both have won the Formula One World Championship. In another case, John Surtees was a 7-time motorbike world champion when he made the switch to Formula One. Driving for Scuderia Ferrari, he would go on to win the 1964 season and would later die in 2017 at the age of 83. Unfortunately, this hides one tragic detail. In 2009, at a Formula 2 race at Brands Hatch, John Surtees' son, Henry Surtees, would be struck and killed by a rogue tire. These 2 stories are a perfect example of the seriousness of this topic and why this video is the way that it is. Once again, we have a father and son, one in which both meet a tragic end, and one where the father has to experience something that no father deserves to experience. I want to finish off this video by looking back at this photograph. Here we see the 7 Formula One drivers all grouped together, and on the one hand we have a dark reality that was not discussed earlier. Before the young Damon Hill would even reach the age of 20 years old, 3 of these drivers would be dead. Wolfgang von Trips would die within the very same year this was taken, Joe Benier would die racing at Le Mans, and Bruce McLaren would die at a test for his own car, the McLaren M8D. Perhaps it can be looked at as a window into the sad world of the past. However, I choose to look at this photograph in a different light. Instead of the 3 drivers destined for tragedy, it is 7 drivers that loved what they did. These men were so passionate about racing, they risked their existence in the pursuit of it. It's a difficult thing to put into words, but it's an energy that you can almost feel. The reason I made this video actually has to do with this emotion. I recently attended the Indianapolis 500, and up in the museum at the track, there are displayed multiple Indy cars from multiple eras. I think we often look at the pictures and are unable to see how fragile these machines were. For someone to willingly get into this machine and fly around at 200 miles per hour is almost beyond me. It's something that goes beyond logic and shows the incredible passion that street drivers had, and it is what makes Formula One during this era and the past truly great.